Well, good morning. It's so great to have you join us so bright and early. I'm Kitty Shidana. I'm co-chair of the Asian American Alumni Association of Princeton, which is where the A4P comes from. And we're just so happy to have you join us on the third of our 4 sessions for the summer webinar series on Asian Americans and civic engagement. Many of you are leaders in the Asian American community and great leaders in civic engagement, so we want to hear as much from you during this session as we are also looking forward to hear from 3 spectacular speakers. This series is organized by A4P in the DC region under the umbrella of the Princeton Club of Washington, with support with the Association of Princeton Graduate Alumni, the Association of Black Princeton Alumni, and the Office of Alumni Affairs. In these polarizing times, we need to find more ways to promote greater dialogue and understanding, including within, in many ways, learning about our own community across and as well as outside of the APIA community. We selected topics and speakers who can broaden and deepen our understanding of the issues affecting the APIA population, and we're bringing together academics with policymakers and practitioners because we want to see how theories track with reality and how we can shape our own realities, how we can write our own narrative into the future. We're delighted to welcome so many leaders, seasoned leaders, as well as young alumni, friends and people of the Asian Pacific Islander community, and the many organizations who are present today to join in our conversations. The generous financial support of several organizations made this possible. First, DSFederal-IDEA Foundation that allowed us to professionally tape the entire series so that others could access the videos afterwards and benefit from them. Sophia Parker is planning to attend, but I don't believe I see her yet, but please do thank her for her support. We also have the International Leadership Foundation for underwriting the participation of the interns and advisors. I know Vincent Liu and many of your fellows are here today, so we're delighted to have you. And then we have the generous support of Seven Seas Restaurant. Corinna Shen is right here, and thank you for coming to this session as well as the last one. We hope we'll see you at the next one in August as well. And then we have Stan Tsai of APGA, who was really part of the birthing of this entire series in working with Rose. So thank you for your support as well as your presence and all of you who are part of the larger community. I also want to recognize the Korean Business Enterprise and the Maryland International Development Center, the Lee Educational Foundation, and AA Lead, all of whom have been fabulous supporters of this series. And thanks also to NCC, our National Capital Contracting, who are doing a marvelous job with the video recordings. I am as excited as you to hear from 3 exciting leaders on strategic resource development and investment in the APIA community this morning. To introduce them, I turn to my A4P DC co-chair, Rose Lee. She is the force behind the series from concept to implementation. She's a force of nature and a joy to work with. So Rose.
So good morning. I am delighted to join Kitty in welcoming you to the 3rd seminar in our summer series on Asian Americans and civic engagement. I want to thank Kitty for being such a positive force and a pleasure to team with in getting the series off the ground. I'm really excited to hear from today's 3 speakers about giving for good by Asian Americans and Asians in general. Strategic philanthropy seems to be taking root among Asians in Asia and in the United States. I believe our community is poised to make a real contribution through philanthropy, which can be seen as yet another avenue for civic engagement. I'm truly honored to introduce Angie Tang from Princeton's class of 1991. She's actually wearing the class jacket. If you it actually says P 1991 written throughout, woven in. Quite clever. In her 25-year career, Angie has served in leadership roles in various distinct components of the philanthropy ecosystem, as grant maker in government, grant seeker in nonprofits, both as executive and board member, and now advisor to donors in addition to her Trans-Pacific experience in the sector. Prior to all this, Angie served in the administrations of President George W. Bush and Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and was executive director of the Committee of 100, a Chinese American leadership organization. Angie played a pivotal role in helping us pull together today's panel. She identified the respected experts in the field who were gracious enough to join us and travel all the way from New York City and Seattle, Washington, to share their insights with us. Kyun Yoon is co-founder and executive director of the Korean American Community Foundation in New York City. She is a longtime community leader and advocate for promoting philanthropy in the Asian American community. She is also an award-winning and the first Korean American broadcast reporter in New York. Kyun has been tremendously successful in tapping Korean American donors to support those less privileged in our community. Victor Guo earned his PhD from Stanford University and worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle. He currently advises and consults on philanthropic projects in the United States and Greater China through VK Global Advising. He is known for helping philanthropic organizations measure their social impact, which means he's really strong on bringing credible data to inform the discussion. So we're thrilled to have these three experts with us today. I'm going to turn it over now to Victor to provide some framing remarks to start our conversation, one that we welcome all of you here to participate in. Victor.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. I'm delighted to be here, and my role at this point is to provide just some opening comments to help frame the conversation. So what I'd like to do is quickly review some of the themes that we'll be addressing that you'll hear from Angie and Kyung and myself. We'll touch on global, regional, and national themes. We'll look a little bit at the comparisons between kind of democratizing philanthropy and philanthropy among elite givers, mega donors, so to speak. And we'll talk definitely about impact investing, outcomes, and measurement. I wanted to give you a couple of data points or headlines that give you a sense of how things are going today, globally and domestically, in the world of philanthropy. Before I do that, I just wanted to mention, when I started in philanthropy about 15 years ago, one of my senior colleagues told me that the way we do philanthropy here, which was at a to be unnamed institution, was we spray and pray. They gave out money and just hoped that something good would come of it. And then a few years later, another colleague of mine said, you know what philanthropy is about, Victor? It's about the 3 M's: money, modesty, and mystery. And that was kind of catchy, but a little disappointing, quite honestly, because when you think about it, those are not the most inspiring kinds of terms to think about giving for good. The most recent kind of phrase that I came across was, in God we trust, but all others bring data, which I think is quite appropriate because nowadays people are very data-driven. Real quickly, some of the major trends that we see today are the rise of tech and entrepreneurial philanthropists, philanthropists coming from e-commerce or the web. We also see a lot of philanthropy that's focused strategically, again, not necessarily based on just giving for giving's sake, but with a results orientation in mind. And then also new structures for giving, using the internet, online giving, technology and social media. And then also thinking about philanthropy as a mechanism for international relations and involving governmental entities. One of the biggest trends is that higher education is the biggest recipient of many of these gifts. And this is a graph that the Wall Street Journal published a couple of years ago, indicating that the #1 source of foreign givers to higher education institutions actually was Hong Kong. So Greater China. And the number one institution that was the recipient of most of those funds was Princeton. This is a little outdated. A couple years ago, Harvard got a huge gift, $350 million from a Hong Kong-based foundation, and that pretty much eclipsed all of this. But you can see higher education continues to be a major recipient and area of giving and receiving. Stanford there is number 2. I'll just make that plug. In addition to giving from foreign sources, we also saw Jerry Yang and Akiko Yamazaki giving $75 million, again to Stanford, but also from the mainland, Zhang Xing and her husband Pan Shi from Soho Foundation giving $100 million to Harvard and Yale. These are trans-global givers or transnational givers, really philanthropists who see themselves as much more beyond their home country and trying to influence global trends. This second slide shows that the number of cities that are major concentrations of wealth, of the 25 top cities, about 11 of those are in Asia, including South Asia or India, Hong Kong again being the number 1. Larger trends, again, China has now become the largest economy in the world, according to the World Bank, adjusting for purchasing power, parity power. And the number of billionaires in China has eclipsed that of the US. So these are some incredible trends. The major concern here is that even though the economic development is increasing, social development lags behind. So taking care of things like equity and concerns for social issues is a major, major concern. The last trend that I wanted to highlight is US domestic giving. This is a slide that shows of all US foundation funding, the percent that goes to Asian American Pacific Islander communities. And the problem here is that on your y-axis, those are proportions of 1%. So the maximum there is 0.7%. In other words, Asian Americans receive less than 1% of all US foundation funding. At the most, in 2002 there, it was about 0.6%. But we represent about 4% of the population. So the concern is we are not receiving the proportionate amount of our representation in the general population. So there are major concerns that even though we are underrepresented in the population, we should be receiving more funding to meet the social needs that we have. And oftentimes, we have a model minority myth situation going on where Asian Americans are not seen as being in need. So that is a major concern. At the end of the day, what is the result? What is the end result of all of this? And this is a major concern and a trend. How do we measure the impact of all of these billions of dollars, and how can we claim that something good has come of it? And this is a key trend and attention that I think we'll address among our panelists. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Angie and then Kyung, and then we'll move into conversation after that. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Victor. It's an honor, privilege, as well as a pride for a Princetonian to be addressing a panel that is organized by fellow Princetonians for the Princeton Club of New York, for Washington, D.C. Coming from New York, where we have a very vibrant Princetonian community, we have not had a chance to organize a panel such as this, so I applaud the organizers of this engagement series, not just for having the foresight to focus on philanthropy, which is an area that has been overlooked but is quickly growing and with which speed, trans-Pacifically and globally. So I want to use this opportunity to also highlight my two great fellow speakers here who are great friends and pioneers in the work they do. When this series was conceived, I thought of them right away because between the three of us, we probably have interface with a fairly comprehensive aspect of philanthropy, from corporate to institution, to corporations, to foundations, to family foundations, to fund and media, government, and so all of the cross sections are covered. So I'm hoping that to have a organic discussion today, and please, we welcome your questions, and we welcome. So you may see some more very spontaneous discussion that we do, and that is the hope that we would even instill some normative discussion in not just descriptive, not necessarily a debate, but there might be disagreements that amongst different stakeholders of the philanthropy spectrum. So let me begin with what is impact investing, which is driving this the field of philanthropy has really been catapulted by the growth of the impact investing movement. Anyone has heard of impact investing and know what it is? Anyone? Anyone wants to tell me? It's a very popular movement in all the global networks, institutions. The World Economic Forum, for example, Davos, has invested significant resources in impact investments and in driving the movement. Many of the leading business schools, including Stanford. In fact, I think Stanford is the leading graduate business school that has been driving in a network of impact investment as well as philanthropy. So impact investments, depending on who you ask, you get a bifurcated definitions. If you ask a investment manager, they would say that, in impact investing is creating portfolios that would generate market rate returns while advancing social and environmental aims. And so it's really firstly generating returns and while you're doing good, right? But if you ask most philanthropists and people, advocates like myself that are driving the movement, will say that impact investment is making an intentional investment towards social and environmental benefit alongside a financial return that may or may not be market rate. So that, I think, dichotomy you would see or cite skew differences happens across the spectrum. And recently I was at a reception where I was explaining to a British diplomat what I did and my profession. And a colleague from the Council of Foreign Relations said, well, Angie, 2 years ago you would be explaining what impact investing is. You've gone quite mainstream. And it is a field that has gone mainstream. So in the short 2 years, when I entered the field in 2014, after spending 5 years as a nonprofit executive, the size of the market, that's called what we call impact investment, was 6.57 trillion. And it has grown in 2014 in 2 years, 76%. 2012 to 2014, and it's still growing in a way that that's consistent with how philanthropists want to commit their giving. And I think that what I talk about, the global trends, both here in the U.S. and Asia, would bear out also in some of the community giving and in how we give as Asian Americans. And I hope to have that dialogue. While we could talk more about how some of these trends, how impact investment has become mainstream, are driven by demographic changes. It reflects a generational changes of how millennials do business, how they acquire goods and services, how millennials do giving and investing, mirror a lot the habits of Asian Americans and Asians in general. And so we'll hope to have a dialogue. I would love to hear what Kyung said, and then we can have a discussion. I would also want to take this opportunity to talk about some of the challenges that are facing the space of impact investment as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here, and thank you to the organizers and to everyone for coming out. I think the piece that I can really address, and Victor, was a really great painting of the landscape, but I think what we're seeing up here around the domestic trends in America as Asian American community, and it's a pretty bleak statistic nationally that we are 4% and growing, and actually by the year 2025, Asian Americans are going to be surpassing Hispanics as the largest ethnic population in this country. And we are yet not able to receive, in terms of our, our demographic representation, it's just, almost less than, just half of 1%. Of foundation funding. In New York City, where I live and work, we are actually, Asian Americans are 14% now of the population, and still the proportion of government contracts, foundation funding, that number is not really, the needle has not moved. And as Victor alluded to, a lot of it has to do with this mindset of Asian American community all doing very well, and so as a result, we don't need help. And I think that has been, I had an African American friend say to me, like, what's so wrong, with being stereotyped as hardworking and successful? I would love my community to be, to be stereotyped that way. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, the problem with that is that there are certainly, every stereotype is based on, some truth. We are, hardworking and diligent, but there are many, many people in our community that are left behind, that face significant barriers in terms of lack of English proficiency, that are facing poverty, that are just not being able to get connected to opportunities. And those opportunities, and often the social safety nets that are there in our immigrant communities at the first level, are sort of the grassroots organizations, the nonprofits that are working very much on the front lines. And unfortunately, they are largely invisible to mainstream funders, because they also, just like the people they serve, often they are lacking in terms of fundraising abilities, or that they're just in terms of just being big enough to be competitive or to be able to write a grant in English. So those are the kinds of gaps that we recognized 14 years ago in New York. I was a part of a small group of Korean Americans who, like me, I think we were sort of next generation immigrants. We were really very blessed to have had opportunities for education, to be able to speak English, to be able to have been given the tools to be able to navigate American society and corporate culture, thanks to the sacrifices of our parents and to the first generation. And yet, we realized, as we were actually just starting out as a dinner time conversation, that the model of success that we had embraced and been encouraged to embrace, and that we had gone forward with, was a very individualized concept of success. We just, get into the right school, get a great first job, and actually, quite ironically, our idea of success, as one Korean American, very successful Wall Street friend of mine told me, he said, I grew up just thinking like, the further I get out of Flushing, the more successful I am. The further I get away from my community, the more successful I am. And so in the same way that almost the better you speak English, maybe that you lose your native language, in some ways the more successful you become, it became just not questioned that you would just be losing your ties to your community. So we saw that as something that we wanted to try to intervene and to fill a gap here because we saw a lot of needs. We saw a lot of needs. 1 in 4 Korean American seniors in New York lives in poverty. Korean Americans also have the highest uninsured rates of any ethnic group in this country. There were just like staggering statistics, and as Victor says, a lot of it has to do with data, that you have to be able to make a case and for the needs before people understand that, that these needs have to be addressed. So we formed the Korean American Community Foundation in the fall of 2002 as an organization that is really around, one, promoting philanthropy in our own community. I think it's really important to make a case and also agitate and advocate for more funding for our community from outside the community. But we also saw the need. It was a very different dialogue when you can say, give us funding or help our community versus join us in giving funding, join us in helping our community. So I think that was very powerful. I think the other lesson that we have learned, and just in terms of having a community foundation, it brings us to the table of funders, and that's very important too, because it, philanthropy as a field and as a sector, it's a very privileged place to be starting. The idea of working in a field where you are giving, that presupposes that you have something to give. And for many of us as immigrants or as children of immigrants, we don't grow up with that mindset because often we were just struggling to survive. And so but for this next generation, those of us who were around that dinner table conversation, we saw that the focus is not so much on surviving anymore, but it's really on thriving. And what does that mean? And how do we define success away from individual success to more of a community success? And so in our first year of operations in 2003, and we were largely volunteer-driven, and we were asking family and friends, to donate to our cause, because usually a foundation starts when some millionaire, billionaire has like something to give, but we just had an idea, and we wanted to kind of help our community get in the habit of thinking of ourselves as philanthropists. So we started with a slogan, $1 a day for our neighbors, so less than a cup of coffee we can set aside to help our struggling neighbors. And really the thinking was that as much as we would have loved Korean American Mr. Gates, to come and give us $365,000, that actually 1,000 of us coming together, let's say, and committing $1 a day, that was a lot more powerful. But anyway, in our first year, 2003, we raised $60,000, the founders, which we gave out to 5 community organizations working with the low-income and vulnerable communities. That was 2003. This year, in 2016, we just finished our grant-making cycle, and we just surpassed $5 million in grants to the community. So it's been, so it's been really an experiment, but more than that, it's been really an encouragement to all of us to be able to organize around philanthropy, and I can go into more details there. But I think I'll just end by just sharing with you a story that really helped me a lot. It was by a very seasoned philanthropist who told me this story. And when Victor started about talking about how to look at different types of how to, if you have so many dollars to give, like where are you going to have the most impact? So the story is that there are 3 women, and they're walking by a river, and they hear screaming and cries for help. So they run, and they see little children, babies, drowning in the river. So what do? What would I do? We jump in, and they start pulling the drowning babies out of the water. But the more they're pulling out, the more babies are coming downstream. So they're getting tired, of pulling the babies out of the water. So the second woman in the middle at one point says, we can't just keep pulling these babies out of the water. We have to teach them how to swim. So she starts teaching these children, babies, how to swim. And the third woman comes out of the water, and she starts walking upstream because she wants to know why babies are being thrown in the water or falling in the water. So I think that story encapsulates actually, how we can think about philanthropy. And because clearly when there's a disaster, when babies are drowning, when people are dying, we all have to pitch in. And we all know that it's better to teach a man how to fish than to give him a fish, the second woman's approach. And so that's very important too. But that third piece, that third woman who's doing the uphill work, if we can look at what are the root causes of poverty, of inequality, and look at what are the systemic problems, and we can right those, then actually you wouldn't need women 1 and 2. But I have to say that from my experience, because we're also fundraising for the work we do, number 1, pulling the babies out of the water is the easiest to fundraise for, because everybody gets it. When there's a disaster, when there's something, then everybody will send money or will send clothes or will help. And even the teaching the babies how to swim, people get that. That third part, and then here I think we can get into a conversation about that in all the movement towards data and metrics, that third part is the hardest to measure. Because in a way, it's really easy to measure how many shelter beds were filled. It's much harder to measure why we have homelessness. And yet, if we have to address that, or else we're just going to keep building more shelter beds and putting Band-Aids on the problem. So I think this is a dilemma, and I'd love to sort of get your thinking around that and to share our ideas. So thank you.
Great. Yeah. I also want to pick up on the third piece that we talked about. In a way, that's what impact investment and the movement in impact investing, social finance, microfinance, they all do, is to try to fill up the gap of intractable global endemic problems. And many of the philanthropists, like Mark Zuckerberg and the millennials givers, philanthropists, feel that in addition to the data-driven shortage that they find, there's also a shortage of capital. Purely, the gap is so huge. The UN, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for ending global poverty by 2030, it's 172.5 trillion. So at 172.5 trillion, which is needed as a benchmark to fill out the world's bridges, infrastructure, to fill in pipes for water shortage, all of that minimally that is needed by 2030, 172.5 trillion. It's only met by about 365 billion worldwide from governments, government assistance, grants, and philanthropy together from developed countries to the developing countries. So we have a gap here between 172.5 trillion and 365 billion. Whereas the world's global markets is at 225 trillion. So there is a reason why there's a large proponent of impact investment and moving the capital markets to fill in the gap for the world's most serious endemic problems. And the third piece, like Kyung articulated, is difficult because it's very data-driven. Many of the impact investor managers are looking at investment that would provide the data. Many of the companies now give only according to what we call ESG standards, ESG considerations, environmental, social, and governance considerations. And many of those investments do not make those benchmark, would not be considered. So the trend in impact investment as well as philanthropy would be more towards looking at those considerations that would pass the benchmark of USG concepts and or impact measurements that fill in how many babies are being saved. One of the fund that I work with, it's a very new fund. In fact, one of the very few in Asia that we see that addresses, that would meet the impact investment standard created by Credit Suisse and UOB of Singapore. And it helps a company invest in a company in China that makes soy-based nutritional packets for infants in rural areas in China who are facing nutritional crises. And the company is mostly government funded, but needs the additional funding to build up its infrastructure to reach more rural communities. And so with the first round of funding, it's now provided for about 600,000 more babies to be fed these packets. And so that type of information, that type of data are critical to donors now to have the knowledge of knowing that in the next stage, the government wants to target 400 million of more children, more infants to be served in 60 more counties of China. So there is a goal, and there's also a definable and definitive outcome. 600,000 more babies are being served because of this funding. So I turn to the data expert who will share. Victor, what do you feel that with the next stage of the investor community that are looking at their KPIs and the ROIs on their investment? Because many of the traditional investors would say, well, impact investments are not exactly your best products because it's like a houseboat. It's not a very good house and it's not a very good boat. However, the more evolving thought, especially with the business school elites, are thinking, well, it's more like brunch. You get breakfast and lunch. It's the best of both worlds. So some thoughts about that, Victor.
Well, actually, I was going to turn this back on the two of you because I think you both have two very interesting perspectives. I mean, one is a very business-oriented lens, and the other, I would say, is a very community-oriented lens. And this brings into question, how can these two meet in the middle? Let me illustrate. So there may be two perspectives here. One is, I want to see some returns on my investments. What am I going to get out of this? That's the typical business point of view. On the other hand, the community member is, am I now your contractor? Am I supposed to subvert my goals for yours, or where is my self-determination and my self-empowerment of determining what it is that I want to achieve? And furthermore, I don't have research staff, and I don't know where to get the data, and I don't know how to analyze the data, and you're expecting all of these complicated calculations of me when I'm trying to go out there and snatch that baby out of the river. How are you gonna support me in doing that? So this is actually a real debate. And
can I add one more?
absolutely, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
And
So I
on
would-
top of that is that often they're looking that funders are looking at our community-based organizations and saying, you got to keep your overhead low, right? And so, but then they're demanding, a lot of very sort of high-level data and things that have nothing to do with, the actual work that they're supposed to be doing. So it's a little bit, and I think that is the difference also with, with the nonprofit community. They face this sort of critique of, having overhead, right? Like the administrative costs have to be kept low. So it's a very, very difficult balance that many of these, in my conversations with people who are running these organizations, I think that that has been a real challenge for them.
On the overhead piece, I think it's typically 10%, and across the board, all corporations, CBOs, community-based organizations, would always try to keep the overhead at about 10%, and they say that upfront to many of the funders. And I just read just 2 weeks ago, a piece on philanthropy from the Harvard Business Review, and it very much articulates the crises that most nonprofits are running with that 10% declaration, because they are not meeting it. And in fact, where they are falling short, ironically, is in the area of fundraising. That while you spend $1 on human resources, they say, you get about 80 cents back of employee satisfaction, of lower turnover in terms of benefits, if you spend every dollar you spend on human resources. Whereas if you spend $1 in fundraising, you may generate $10, $12 more in terms of returns on your revenue. $1 spent on human resources does not give you a return on your revenue. It gives you a return on the ancillary morale, employee morale, improves your employee workplace satisfaction. And so there is that dichotomy that we see. But I also see, to Victor's discussion, that I think that's why pioneers like Kyung come in. When you have an intermediary, when you have a visionaries that could help the community-based organizations fill the gap between foundations and the delivery services. Because what Kyung does is not just funding those organizations. Let's say a group of 30 or your grantees now has the capacity through the funding to get to where they weren't before, not just at delivery, but they're closer to having a track record to get that grant from the foundation by having had that previous experience.
So I will try to answer your question, to be fair, but then we also want to open it up for discussion.
Sure.
So one thought, in direct response, is I think an exciting development in the world of philanthropy as well as evaluation and research are big data techniques, data visualization techniques, experts who can come in and facilitate the gathering and analysis of data in a relatively easier way, so that smaller organizations, individuals who don't have that expertise can rely on those kinds of tools, data visualization packages, or other kind of data extraction. Singapore is really great at this. South Korea has some really interesting things going on, where lots of data are automatically gathered and it's not so burdensome on individuals and nonprofit organizations, and then turning that into something usable and understandable. ultimately, at the end of the day, I do think that the kind of research and evaluation that you impose on a grantee has to take into consideration their capacity to respond to that. And there are different stages of maturity at which an organization is able to engage in that kind of activity. So as funders or grantors, incredible sensitivity to meeting those organizations where they are, I think, is really key. So I hope that's some help. But with that, I think we have about 15 minutes to open it up for discussion. And we have a microphone here, or if you want to ask your question from your seat, I think that would be okay too.
Hi, my name is Chen Chu. First of all, thank you so much for coming and talk about this. I know that I've been to a lot of meetings. This is one of a very unique topic you're covering, so I really appreciate that. I myself came to the United States 21 years ago, and I graduated from Tsinghua University. That's why I'm wearing purple. It's my school color. And I also experienced what Ms. Jung said, from surviving to, I'm not thriving yet, but try to be thriving. And what I feel from immigrant experience is in our Eastern Asian culture, mostly we're more like self-reliance, right? And it's good and bad. The good is, we try not to seek outside help. But at the same time, for philanthropy is like, hey, we're not seeking outside help, and we're not giving help to other people at the same time. So what I sense is, for example, right now, the friends I know or the colleagues I know, the general thought is, I can spend $100 an hour to hire a tennis coach for my daughter, for my son, or piano lessons. But if you ask me to give $100 to do certain things, right, which I don't see direct result, I kind of say, oh, it's expensive, but spending ourselves is not. So what do you think, how are we gonna change that kind of mentality of the immigrant sort of parents or that general population? Thank you.
Maybe I can take a crack at. Thank you so much. I think that's a really great observation, and one that we are also, we've been able to, I don't want to overstate it, but we definitely have seen in our work a change in sort of that kind of mindset. And I think we really have to kind of zoom out, because one of the things, and I spoke about why organizing in itself gives us a bigger voice and gives us a bigger visibility. So the issue is that when we are not sort of at that table, when we are not, I think many of us have seen examples of where Asian Americans, where it is where spoken or unspoken, there are certain quotas in terms of how many can be sort of at the table. And so what happens then is, when you are paying for your kid to have the tennis lessons and the SAT prep, all of it in these sort of micro investments into the individual success, we're just setting up our kids, my kid to compete with your kid, for whatever limited spots that we somehow are going to be, so somebody else is going to decide, right, that our children are going to be able to compete for. So I feel like that is sort of the mindset. Instead of like working on this sort of individual so that we can compete with each other, that we can invest together so that we can create more opportunities for more children. And I'm not talking just about Asian American community. I think for all of us, I think this is what is, it's very, very important, and a difference in mindset. So I will say very concretely with KACF, Korean American Community Foundation, one of the things is that we need to kind of create momentum around that. I mean, everybody is gets it, right, around kind of investing in your child's education, and we all should. I mean, we all should. But we can also take another $100 and invest smartly so that we can do something on a very macro way versus just in a micro. And I think just the last piece, too, that I've seen, sometimes as Asian Americans or as immigrants, you know, as you move from surviving to thriving, often, you know, you're going to also invest, I mean, in things that are kind of prestigious. I mean, and it's great that people give to Princeton University, and we shouldn't say that there's anything wrong with that, or to the opera, or to, to fight cancer. I mean, all of that. But there are needs in our own community, and I think if we can also just carrying that strand of our shared identity and heritage and giving back to help our neighbors as well, that has not been prestigious. And I think in some way we are kind of, as we lift up the community and as we create a dynamic where it's also a good thing to give to each other, that's long-term work. That's maybe lady number 3.
I agree. I started working with Kyung, I think, when Kyung was still a journalist, but part volunteering her personal time, like many of us. And it takes some generations, it takes some time to grow and cultivate giving habits. And as many of the immigrant communities go through that, as a former government official as well as a nonprofit executive, we have seen those growth. And many of the members of the organization that I represented have already passed through that thriving stage to become elite Chinese Americans. And many of them were very committed philanthropists across the board in many different causes. So that is a passage that, as Kyung outlined, that also needs to have advocates like herself and the work she does to cultivate with organization promotion, just asking individuals to support, I think would be, like you said, you would be comparing your pros and cons of benefits. But events such as disasters would promote, I'm sure you may be more likely to give if Tsinghua is doing a solicitation for a green or socially or disaster-related cause that you feel close to. So many of those, once you first make the first giving, if you have a habit to making that first commitment, you continue to expand your horizon. And I think there are many other channels that we discussed on the PowerPoint that would trigger one's giving. There would be also more technological ease of giving, for example. Maybe easier than you writing a check. If they were to offer you a plan whereby you give $1 a day or a weekly donation, I, as a former government official, a government employee, we had a network where our salary was deducted, and I donated from every paycheck. I deducted $20, $30 to a certain cause, and so that automatically is taken from my paycheck. And so I did not have to do anything. I designated my charities at the get-go at every beginning of the year. And so there are multiple platforms, channels of giving that may facilitate your giving habits. And I think that those are definitely developing and could be helped by many more of us that are in the advocate community.
Thank you. That was a fabulous discussion. One of the things that I find frustrating about some of this data is it seems like maybe the Asian community gives in ways that are not captured by conventional data collection sources. So for example, when like Peter Lang had the issue with the policeman in New York, I read in an article that, people heard about it in the Chinese community. Grandmothers would go and donate to the Benevolent Association just $5 or $4, and they collected hundreds of thousands of dollars to help somebody in the community who was in need. So I'm just wondering, is there a way to capture some of that data which definitely shows that Asians do, because it seems like there's a perception that Asian Americans are successful, but they don't give as much. But I just wonder how much they're giving through other means that are not captured. And I also notice when I would travel to Asia, a lot of Asians, like in Taiwan, seem to, of the Buddhist tradition, when there's a natural disaster, they give a lot to help that. They pay for themselves, they volunteer to go help with relief. And somebody was telling me that they actually have to pay their own expenses, thousands of dollars to go and have the opportunity to help out. And there's a waiting list sometimes of wanting to volunteer and do that. So that suggests a different kind of ethic or ethos that maybe isn't captured in conventional data collection. Just wondering if you could comment on that.
People are looking at me, so I think I'll give it a try. No, I think that's an excellent point. And in fact, I think, the Foundation Center or the IRS, these institutions gather a lot of this information, but they miss a lot of the hidden giving. And from my understanding, actually the vast majority of giving is unseen. It's kind of private, or even to religious institutions where that data are not reported, it's not required by the government. So it really does bring into question these misperceptions, I would say, that Asians or a lot of times it's directed at Chinese for some reason, but there's this sense that we're not contributors, that we're just takers, and that we're stingy. I've seen newspapers and magazines where that's been stated explicitly. And I think the challenge to those of us in the community is, especially for the big donors, but I think everyone in general, how do you see yourself in a public view, in a leadership role, in an advocacy role? The tendency is to be modest and to not promote yourself. But in some cases, it can be done with, I think, some strategic thought and with some benefit overall. As leaders, we can inspire others to give. If we give in ways that are meaningful and that are impactful, that can actually have some result. And I think it's very, it's an issue of professionalism, of strategy, of your thoughtfulness of why you give. And when we come into this space, it really does require people to think, why am I giving? Is it because of self-satisfaction, or is it affiliation, or is it impact, or what is it? And for all those reasons, there are different ways in which you can give in ways that are appropriate. But it does come back to leadership, engagement, and how we see ourselves as part of a larger whole.
And if I can just follow up on that, those are really good points. And great question, because that's true that, it's not like we give so that we can, be recognized. But on the other hand, I think, again, the work of our foundation, of KACF, has been actually to change. And we know actually that, that our community members are very, very generous. But it hasn't been, organized. So we were trying to translate sort of random acts of charitable giving. So Victor gives here, and Angie gives there, and I do, but if we can give together, then the same amount actually has a great deal more impact. And it has, and think about it from the recipient's point of view, not just from the giver's point of view. If you are trying to make change, not just putting out a fire here or there, but really trying to do deep, long-term change to transform people's lives and to lift up community, it takes planning, it takes strategy, just as any long-term enterprise would. What kind of resources would be more valuable to you? Some, of course you appreciate the sudden burst of generosity that somebody might feel today as an individual giver, but you really appreciate a foundation coming in, giving you a grant, working with you to think through what are the steps and being a partner to you, promising multi-year so that you can plan for next year and the following fiscal year as well. So I think those are all ways that we as givers can think beyond charity to really change and to investing in transformative change. And often that it does require visibility and not, and I wouldn't say that that's not being humble. It just means that you're being a lot more smart and strategic.
I guess I would add to Rose's question, not to the part of the data collection, but specifically more about in the Peter Leung case in New York, about 800,000 were collected through cash and different means of payment that were through social media. And that is a change that was different from September 11, the post-September 11 relief, where many of the community came through. There was an outpouring of both the Buddhist and individual givers, donors of the community, and groups like the Buddhist group that Rose talked about. But it was not organized in any way. This is pre-social media, after September 11 in 2002 and 2001. And folks fast forward to this year, 2016, through WeChat, many of the protests, many of the philanthropic, many of the solicitations were made through these channels. And so when we talked about technology breakthroughs do help our modes of giving. And so this is not a data collection issue, but the trends of giving would improve along the ease of giving as well as the platform facility of giving.
Having worked in mission-based nonprofits my whole work life and in resource development, I just want to say I learned so much from each of you today and so appreciate the key points that you've lifted up. I mean, Angie, when you talked about the lack of capital, because we have a $1 trillion problem of which we only have millions to invest in. And Victor, when you mentioned that the people have to be part of this is not about us giving to. And I think Kyung, you just articulated so beautifully the whole issue of joining us, that we're joined together to plan for the longer term. And so I had so many questions in my mind, and I wonder if you could leave us with some last thoughts about how we've often talked about how change happens in communities, which is where it's most meaningful, but change happens at the speed of trust. And I'm also struck with, from a business standpoint, the corporations are beginning to look at the issue of shared value, that it isn't about social investment on the side and then business on the other side, but actually merging it together, and how the community between its business sectors and other sectors and the nonprofit sector could together advance this issue of shared value, that doing good is good for profit and bringing people together is good for investing in the future. So any thoughts you have about that, I'd love to hear.
Maybe I'll begin with the investment outlook. I see that the space of impact investing is growing towards the direction of more democratizing, more bringing down the level of the entry level of investments. For example, most of the wealth management in the country starts at somewhere around 100,000, and many of those investments start at that level. There are now funds that are offering levels that starts at 25,000, that reach beyond the intermediaries to the individual investors. And many of the impact investing professionals are promoting and targeting different asset classes. And the government definitely steps in as well to encourage the social entrepreneurship and the act of considering these ESG standards that I discussed. For example, my former employer, the U.S. Department of Labor, which governs the pension funds that are run. There's an act of that's called ERISA, this Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, that oversees how pension funds and what pension funds can invest in. In October 2015, last year, it dramatically updated and clarifies its guidance to reflect that pension funds can now invest in impact investments according to the three standards, the environmental, social, and governance considerations. So that would dramatically expand the amount of investments that would be in the capital system, like it did to venture capital many years ago when pension funds were not able to invest in VCs, and that really created a huge avalanche of capitals in the system.
I think I would just add that each and every one of us can be a bridge builder, I think, in this area, because there is a real gap. I mean, so you look at sort of philanthropy and resources, and again, just, my purview, which is really around getting more resources to those who really need it in our community. And so just as, that fourth grandparent who's living in poverty, who looks like us, might be very invisible to mainstream America, and doesn't speak English, has no voice, can't walk up to an investment bank and say, I need help. Those of us who are working in those investment banks, and I've seen it, are able to advocate internally to get, there are lots of dollars there of, let's say, a bank that is working in communities and want to demonstrate that they are working. We can play that bridge role of raising awareness about needs and about what are the organizations that are doing effective work, and really getting a flow of funds, flow of resources to that grandmother or to people who have just been very, very marginalized and rendered invisible. And I feel like this is a really exciting time for us as Asian Americans who have, again, just to remember that we are all in where we are because of sacrifices of others, and that it is kind of our time to be looking at what we can do. And then again, each of us individually can do so much, but I think when we think together and put our heads together and really join hands, that we can really do something very significant. And that's been the work that we've been launching and pioneering in New York. And I hope that it can be something that catalyzes some more thinking in broader communities as well.
And I would just add that there is so much talent in this room, Princeton University, or wherever, whatever institution you come from, whatever background you come from, be it government, business, or the nonprofit sector, this matter of cross-sector collaboration, you all play roles in helping build those bridges and bringing those different sectors together to ultimately impact social change. And I think as you think about your careers, for those of you who are at the beginning, or even those who are midway or topping off their careers, how can you enter into this idea and make a contribution? I started this off by saying, there's kind of these old-fashioned thoughts about money, modesty, or mystery, or whatever. And I think at the end of the day, it needs to be a balance of heart and mind. A business sense with a community sense, a results orientation with some personal compassion, passion, satisfaction, and bringing those together and balancing them out, I think, is probably the best way to go.
Well, thank you you so much to our wonderful presenters. I think that was fabulous. Let's give them a round of applause. I think one of the lessons that I took away from this discussion is that as leaders in the community, we have to champion the sponsors that have actually supported our efforts, and that's why we always recognize all of our sponsors for this, DS Federal, ABPA, ILF, 7Cs, because they really are supporting the community in so many ways that maybe are not sufficiently publicized. So we will continue to do that, and we hope all of you take that as a lesson too. Before we let you go, we wanted to give you a little token of Princeton cheer.
Halloween in July. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me grab you. Thank you. I got my umbrella.
Oh, thank you so much.
Maybe perhaps we can do a photo op.
I just want to add my thanks as well. I think the three of you are just fabulous, and we're so, thank you, Angie, for your compliment about our organizing this series. And I was over there listening to each of you and thinking, boy, I can't believe we got them to come and speak with us, because you're fabulous leaders, and we're very lucky to have the chance to hear from you, to learn from you, and engage with you. So please give our speakers another round of applause. And I also want to invite you to come to the last of our series this summer on August 3rd, Wednesday, same time, same place. And we will hear from two other just marvelous people more on the political arena. The number of Asian Pacific Islander voters will double in this country by 2040. We will hear from Professor Janelle Wong from the University of Maryland, who has done research on various attitudes and behaviors of Asian Americans when it comes to engagement in the political process. And then we will have the Honorable Mark Kim, who is the first Asian-born member of the Virginia House of Delegates. And I think very much in keeping with what Kyung described about leaders giving to communities, he has been a generous and engaged and committed leader for the state as well as for his community. So please do come out and join us. And thank you again, and safe travels. Bye-bye.